Normally, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, so I can still own my computer app.
We'll be moving on to our next workshop now, which I actually wanted to start with a bit of a conversation. I feel like we've kind of explored a lot of the ways that we're not doing AI well, and the ways it's challenging us and complicating things, and all the bad actors involved, and they're not so bad. But maybe we could begin this next workshop with a brief 10-15 minute conversation about the ways that AI is good, and we can go around and share some experiences where we've been thoroughly impressed by the ability of AI, or a time where it's really allowed you to do something that you likely wouldn't have been able to do pre-AI. And maybe I'll actually popcorn to Leo and ask him to kick this off and share about a time, Leo, that you found AI to be doing something that's kind of mind-blowing.
In a good sense.
In a good way.
So I like Mark. I use AI probably about 50% of my waking hour. And what I do is I feed it with all my Zoom conversations, so all our meetings are recorded. And we, as I mentioned before, we deliberately seek out dialogues with people who don't think like us. So they're all being collected, all the phone conversations, all the Zoom meetings, all the WhatsApp papers that were being shared, and we have archived them in a large knowledge base on Amazon. And then we're creating a RAG model using small language models, and we're going to open this so that we start infiltrating the conversations, the papers of other people. So it starts when you upload a paper, it starts looking at where the sources of bias immediately. It becomes part of the criticism. And as I said, if they start charging me $1,000 a month next month, I will pay for it, unfortunately. And that's bound to happen because they are bleeding money. All these language models are losing money every single day. And the only way out is for them to jack up our subscription. So I think they're just waiting for us to be addicted. And then as soon as we're addicted, they're going to hit us with $100 to $1,000 subscription rate. So I don't know, maybe I should be cutting back a little bit, but I'm hoping that what we have now might be good enough so that even if I stop subscribing to Claude, I could rely on Leomi, which is the name of the LLM, because it has already about a year and a half of conversation and Zoom meetings and papers. So I think it's almost like an insurance, just in case it becomes $1,000 a month, because I won't have that money for sure. So stay tuned, we will be releasing it, unleashing it to the world.
So I'd love to hear from others as well about times you've been kind of blown away by AI. Maybe some stories about that.
I started using local models on Cloud. And so if you have like a powerful machine, you can download an open source model from Anyplace, link it to Cloud, and use it for free. And you can even use it in an airplane. So, even if they start charging you, you can maybe use a free model that is available on Anyplace and still take advantage of it. So, considering that this is a possibility, I'm a bit skeptical about, Anthropic starting to charge $1,000 even next year, because there's this alternative of local models. Because if you have to pay $1,000 per month, you could just buy a stronger machine and host your own models. But this me like having the possibility to use like a model in your machine and code autonomously. Well.
Yeah, for me, it's I have the same experience. Like, as I have been using ChatGPT, and I find that when I'm using some like open source models, they have maybe they are not as big as the parameters that they have for ChatGPT or cloud, but for this like open source, they actually work pretty well for the tasks that I have been defined. I haven't really deployed it on my own laptop or like for my coding, but I have used these models for other tasks that I have been working with, and sometimes like using the evaluation that I have, it's like it performs as good as the closed models. So I feel like even if they're going to charge me, you know, for that, maybe I wouldn't pay for it. Maybe I will just switch to open source models so that it's more controllable and it's also you know, it costs less for what I would like to do. Yeah, and I'm not sure if they are going to charge us more, maybe it will backfire because maybe less people will be using it. Yeah, and I would say that even dollars maybe for us maybe it's not a lot, but for people in some other places it's still a lot to pay per month. So in that case, I think it's also about like how the fairness of access to the latest technology. So that's another topic.
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
I'd say from like a product perspective, I found it to be incredibly useful to build prototypes to kind of like help visualize what you're thinking of building, and then getting like cross-functional team buy-in very quickly. So at one of the companies I was working at, like probably like 4 years ago when nobody was really touching it just yet, you know, I would like, just to get like legal and compliance buy-in, I'd be like, this is what we're doing. And normally it would take, you know, a couple weeks for legal to come back and forth with and like how it looks, these checkboxes or whatever, and it was just kind of like, okay, legal, tell me what you need. Okay, this is what I'm thinking. This is how we're gonna do it. And like within an hour, it was like sign off. You know, and so that minute, that moment was like the time where I was like, oh, this is gonna be insane, right? Like, I think it's just for like operational efficiency and like just workforce efficiency. It's insane. You know?
I do a lot of and I shoot sometimes in black and white, and so I was kind of impressed when I gave Gemini a black and white photo and said, they colorize this. Actually got the colors somewhat correct. It's like Nano Banana, I think is the specific model it uses behind the scenes.
There's been an interesting clinical story I have, and there's a patient who's, so Hopkins has their own language models that they purchased or subscribed to, I guess, that we run kind of behind our firewall at Hopkins, and so the data never leaves, and they encourage us to, you know, put our PHI on there and use them, and it's safe. So, you know, I try to make it early on, like a habit of making sure that I'm using the means of like second guessing myself or making sure that I'm kind of integrating that into my training early on. And there's a patient, this was my pediatric emergency medicine rotation. The typical patient, 16 years old, came in with the right lower quadrant, bottom right lower quadrant of his abdomen. You know, clinicians, that kind of immediately is like, oh, it must be appendicitis, like a, you know, really severe pain, and has just been nauseous, just not feeling well, hasn't been able to eat. And pretty much everyone on the team, you know, physicians, everyone included, were like, oh, it's probably what that is, before even going into before even looking at his chart, just after conversations. And, you know, one of the things that I tried to do when I was making it a habit is instead of giving it the symptoms and saying, hey, predict what could be on the differential for me, started having it tell me what questions I could be asking when I'm in the room with the patient. And, you know, there were questions, a good chunk of them that I was thinking of that, you know, are typical right lower quadrant or what you should be asking, but also, you know, it started bringing up questions that maybe I wasn't thinking immediately of asking, like, did you recently have a cold or, you know, upper respiratory infection, and, you know, all these little things that, you know, for a person coming in right lower quadrant, why does it matter they had like a week and a half ago? It doesn't immediately, you know, ring a bell in like a clinician's head as like what dots I'm connecting. But it was really interesting because then I did ask that question, and I came back out of the room, and I noticed that I put the results back in, and I was like, okay, I got my differential. I'm kind of curious to see what it does. It put a new thing on the differential, which I was not even thinking about. And this was essentially there's lymph nodes in your abdomen, and one of the suggestions was, hey, this is just inflammation of one of the lymph nodes in your abdomen, and a cold could have triggered some funky immune thing to happen, and could be going on. That wasn't what was going on with him, but it was interesting to see that we're kind of conditioned very early on in our training to think a certain way, ask only a set of questions, and leave it at that. And it was interesting to kind of see it used in a way where it was helping me break my conformity of like what I should be thinking like. And now every time I have a patient, I'm like, oh, like I think back to that scenario. That was at one time that I guess I could share from like a clinical perspective.
I would push back on that though.
Yeah, please do.
Because it's kind of scenario based, right? Like
Right.
in emergency medicine, you were very clear on like your triage and make sure there's not an emergency, right?
Right.
Like that'd be like a secondary diagnosis where it's
Absolutely.
less
Yeah,
common,
yeah.
right? So that would be if I could show like, well then are you creating noise at a time where you really think, right?
Exactly.
So I'm not sure that's the right approach.
Right. I think we're kind of fortunate there was the pediatric ED and there were like not many patients there, but I in like an adult ED when there's things running around and I'm like sitting there as a medical student spending 40 minutes asking someone questions, we don't have the luxury of that in the adult ED when there's like 70 patients in your waiting room trying to get seen. And I think that's definitely something to think about is like triaging information and sometimes relying on the foundations just at times. And it's like the right use case at the right point in time when the scenario is right, which is beyond AI. But yeah, I think you make a great point.
And this is where like I'd also push back on the fact that like we need to change education. Like in some ways we actually need to make sure that the foundation is being taught regardless. Right? Because you have to be able to pull the context out of like a baseline.
Right.
You know.
Absolutely. And then also being able to like interrogate these models a lot. Because what if another event like COVID happens, or I guess now with like the cybersecurity concerns that takes place, it's like models go down. Like what do we do then? So I think these are all great points. If anyone else would like to add in about an experience, feel free to. If not, we'll jump into
You have good experiences?
Yeah.
Because we've been criticizing and destroying everything that, criticizing every possible outcome from the use of this technology. It's really good to like have some time today to see good things and not
So I changed from an Asian culture back to a Western culture. I was away during the pandemic in Asia and then returned to the Bay Area in 2022. So essentially I didn't have the lived experience of what went on here, and it was very, as many of you have probably experienced, very disorienting to pop back into a different place when a major crisis happens. And so you lose your anchors, your grounding, your footing on what should be. And so some of the discussions with AI is actually takes a lot of the emotion out of those experiences, which actually was very helpful because I was experiencing different reactions from people here that didn't make any sense to me. And I didn't have AI in Asia when I was going through the pandemic, so it's not just a language, it's a culture, it's like flattening the information to make and relevant to you in that specific experience, because you lose yourself when you're changing context, which and I think it can be quite helpful for people to sort of reground. And you were talking about humanity and what makes us human, and I was like, no human could actually give me that information in a neutral perspective. But of course, from the conversation today, it's not a neutral perspective, right? But it was a perspective that wasn't loaded with an emotional response. So sometimes actually the human part is beneficial, because it triggers the wrong things in your body, right? Or your like body reactions. But I see so many applications we talk about to the people science, like helping people adapt to change, because they can see it from a different angle that maybe doesn't have a lot of things loaded. Like you're talking about the medical diagnosis, but then there's the mental diagnosis too, right? And just like adaptation in general. I'm just curious if anyone else used it for that kind of experience. And the other is, the other part is like finding the right formula for flow. Like we all have a prescribed way of how we should act, but actually AI gives some good tips on how to use your energy and your flow to your best ability. So instead of pushing through, maybe you need to find a different like schedule in your day or your week to be able to do what makes you the best at what you do.
I have, following on that, and I have a question for the room. It's more of a survey, actually. So we've been talking about the negative aspects of AI, and now we're leaning towards the positive. I was wondering, so the superpower to decide whether we have the world with AI or without AI, like from today. Can I get like a show of hands for the ones who would have the world without AI?
That's an honest reaction.
That's yeah. Anyone that's doing this, I agree. Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
They will wait.
But I mean, it's a
Well,
good.
there's what about on the fence? You're not sure yet
Yeah.
because
That's fair. I am assuming the rest.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Like, we have spent a lot of today finding faults with AI, but it has become a very integral part of a lot of our workflows. And we're not saying that it's still without. We do think that in order to actually give a full evaluation of how AI is performing and how it's going to perform moving forward, we need to discuss both positives and negatives.
I think the other big thing is like, how do we get the return on like the investment from not like a financial perspective, but as like a social perspective?
Right.
See, all of us in this room are like raising our hands, like so myself putting 2 hands up, like when we start thinking about that, we've put a lot of time, energy, resources, involvement, perspectives, some people into this, and it's like thinking about like how do we maximize this. And I wonder if maybe like the conversations just broadly or kind of at times I find myself wondering if it's more productive to frame it in that sense. And I'm like conversing with people that have different perspectives, or sometimes we're techno-solutionistic or very techno-optimistic and overly techno-optimistic at times, where it's framing it as not as this is bad, but how can we make this the most valuable as possible. And I think that has helped a conversations that I've had. One of those instances is actually with the state of Utah. So there's a company called Doctronic that's like planning to autonomously prescribe medications, and this is the first kind of clinical consumer health AI tool that's doing such a thing. And we started asking like what's going on, like how did this come into existence, and this kind of goes back actually until last year. We heard about this in January when it was released to the public. And it's this Office of AI Policy under the Department of Commerce there. It's about 6 people big, all these people that have tremendous experience in AI. And they, over the past few months, have been in conversations and signed this agreement, this mitigation agreement with Doctronic to basically say, hey, you can prescribe medications here. We don't need you to have a license to do that. And the kind of study that they banked on and demonstrated efficacy was ever testing, medication prescribing. It was looking at decision concordance or discordance when you're in like an urgent care setting where you have like a very narrow cases of types of patients that pop up, and is the AI going to say something similar to what the physician would say? But then their deployment case was with prescriptions, and so we said, hey, like you've evaluated the wrong thing. You're sending this technology out there. This is really dangerous. We wrote about it in the Washington Post. then came the wave of all the pushback from industry. People were calling it calling our perspectives dystopian. They said, we're like not seeing the value of AI, and it kind of put us in a position where it's like, we want it to work really badly, but how do we make sure that we're spurring reflection? And I think this was a moment of realizing and wondering, how do we make this reflection constructive, and how do we invite kind of perspectives into this and let people know that we're not saying don't do this. We're saying let's do this responsibly and let's do this in a way that makes it work for everyone, which is challenging. In our experience, it's a balance. And once we kind of reframed our approach and went back to Utah and they got over feeling upset after that article that we wrote in Doctronic, we're starting to see that now they're more interested in engaging and more interested in building together, whereas before it felt like they were a little polarized. And so I think one of the lessons here that I've learned is like maintaining, even when it's really frustrating to and really challenging in a space like where we're in now, or like the world we're in now, where everyone's thinking this is going to do all these crazy things. It probably will at some point, but right now it's just not fully there yet in all situations. And so it's like one of the kind of reasons that we wanted to reflect on the positive things AI is doing in the same environment, where we're maybe introduce some objectivity in a sense and learn to grapple with that. But yeah, I just wanted to worry about kind of this experience that we've had recently and reflect on it a little bit. And if anyone has had other experiences where people, when you've raised a point, have pushed back, I'd love to hear.
If you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I may be a bit too romantic. At the end of the day, I was born in the Mediterranean, so that's okay. How many of you are familiar with the mythologies from the Greek mythology? Yeah, pretty much everyone. So for those of you who don't know, he was banned because he supposedly stole the fire from the gods. This story is not exactly like that, but it can be summarized as that. The funny thing about the Greek mythology is that with any piece of power bestowed on you, there's always a price to pay. It's never free. We have that story over and over in the Greek mythology. And Sisyphus stole the fire, and with that unleashed power in anyone's control. And gods punished him, or the penalty that they imposed on him was terrible. And I think something similar is happening to us now. Like when I was doing my undergrad in physics and I started to run simulations on biological neural networks, I got fascinated by AI technology, even when it was not a mainstream thing. And time has proved me right. I know exactly what intelligence is, but definitely we have unlocked properties of intelligence in our machines through these algorithms, right? So we have unleashed powers well beyond anyone's control. Now I think in activities like this, what we are trying to figure out is what the punishment is. What are we sacrificing in a way, right? And what the fire is worth for or should be used for. So I don't know, this is like my open-ended proposal of the thing.
So kind of with that and kind of transitioning to the next activity is we realize that the value of perspective and interpretation is really important. And so if we had one chatbot open, saying good morning, Ricardo, what we kind of intended to do is actually develop a prompt together and then walk through an interaction or a use case together and see if we can identify ways that one person or a group of people or some of us might see it in a positive, others kind of find fault or problem with it. And so before we kind of jump into writing the prompt itself, I was wondering if anyone had any interesting kind of problem framings or places that we could start. Otherwise, we'll just default to healthcare.
Two disclaimers here. It's my personal cloud account. I'm an alien to this country, so we don't want the ISO here. And second, if you see any conversation that you are not supposed to see, please pretend you are not seeing it.
So we could ask the question of the panel before. How can we wrestle power away from the tech pros? What should we be doing? Give us a roadmap, give us failure modes, and give us contingency plans.
Anyone else want to add anything or tweak the wording a little bit?
Yeah, wrestle power, I mean, it's a technology, it's created by a business. So just because it's a tool, I don't think, you have to be kind of like, you're putting a lot of weight into this, but any tool can be powerful if it's used a certain way, right? So you're assuming it has power.
No, the power belongs to the tech companies in creating the narrative of how the revolution unfolds. So that's the power
But
that
that's
we
a
want to
very
take.
like loaded sentence
It
that
is.
has a lot of like revolutionary sentiment to it, where if you think of it as a tool that can be used by humans, it's a technology, and there's a roadmap for finding out what challenges can happen when technology is used in a way that takes the human out of human things, then it neutralizes to be something around a tool and humans and not necessarily like business taking over the world. I get concerned that it becomes like a certain movement and not necessarily like grounding it in just humans and tools, and where's the fire where is this fire, basically?
Can you query in two ways, the way that's there and then the way that she's suggesting, and see if
Like
it's
a
different?
follow-up?
No,
Separate
two separate chat, like, we,
And see if it has
see if it's different, like, if you come up with a question that
How you wanna
fits
phrase
how you wanna phrase it, see where you're going, and if you got a question down, you go and see what the difference is.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think the most sensitive
Oh,
yeah.
She's saying turn off the memory between chats.
Oh, yeah, it's only
It's incognito.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever that means these days.
Yeah, I mean, no such thing as private.
That's the biggest. You're just labeling your searches that you want to access.
No, you gotta switch.
Yeah, we added Grok as a way to introduce a different perspective from the AI side.
Oh yeah, I guess you'll have to put them in the same window or deactivate the stage.
So provided the filters are different, just make sure you put the right question in the right biased model that you're hopefully be consistent here.
There we go. Awesome. So on the right side, we have Wrestle Power Away. We can put it on the left side so I'm saying it the right way. On the right side, what would we reimagine that prompt to look like?
I mean,
Yeah.
a neutral tone, maybe a responsible use of AI, with a roadmap.
I'd probably tell it to be like, please be, I'm always very polite to my AI. You never know. You could say like, please be the most objective
Yeah.
judge of, like, I don't know, be a Supreme Court justice. Like, behave like a Supreme Court justice. Please provide the most objective way to provide how we can think of AI, like how we can think about AI in a way that removes bias, and a roadmap of how we could communicate to questions. How about like questions you can ask to help us think through how we can be more balanced about how we think about AI, places where it can fail, what kind of contingency plans we can have in place when we feel like we are being pushed one way or the other. And then I would also add, like, if you don't know the answer, please ask more questions to clarify, and please don't hallucinate any answers and pretend you know. And it's amazing, that works. That actually works in the end. So, but like, please don't, like, if you don't know the answer, please don't pretend, and ask more questions, clarify questions.
I'm just afraid that they're very different.
Yeah,
It's still addressing the same problem.
What?
Because what you're saying is, how do I, on your question, it's asking, how do I get a more.
How do we change the narrative as it's unfolding now?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's another question, how do we leverage AI? I mean, to me, it's just very, very different.
What if you just changed wrestle power with change the narrative. So everything's the same except for just
Yeah, I
that.
think
So on the right, you might want to add, provided the current market power concentration in a small group of companies.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Wall Street Journal sanitized, so throw that out there. Because
Yeah.
No,
You
no,
could say,
it-
just use the word market monopolies, right? It's a
Yeah, but
very-
let's not call it
Oh,
monopoly.
yeah, no, yeah, market concentration.
But you want to have wrestle power, change that to change the narrative, right? Is that?
Yeah.
I'm trying to make it as
Yes.
close to each other as we
Yeah.
possibly can if you really want to see the.
No, but this is great, actually.
Yeah.
It's more important what's happening there than
Yes.
what's
Yeah,
happening
yeah,
here.
yeah.
Like,
This might be a little
imagine
bit-
how different the different prompts would have been.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
had we not had like this space to put them in common, how different outcomes and ideas you would have resulted.
This
It's
is
also
why
very
AI
interesting.
should be used by groups, not individuals.
Oh, absolutely.
So, if we were to, I guess, like rewrite the Russell Power way, what are like a couple words that we can reframe that, like shift, or
Is
like
there a groups beyond this like type of session? You can't do a group AI at this point, right?
So I think
there is.
Yeah,
But
yeah. There's like the
it's
team
not-
stuff, but
There's a team.
Claude.
yeah, called teams. But
I mean, there was a version playing Pokemon. You surely can devise something like.
See, no, don't use that word,
okay.
please. This is Wall Street or the economy's prompt on our right, so let's make sure that this is what we can present to a VC.
Yeah.
This is what you can present any corporation in the US, which this is valid language. How can we,
Address market
There you
concentration.
go.
yeah, mitigate some of the model
Yeah.
deficiencies?
Why don't we just ask Claude to give
Yeah,
us
exactly.
some-
But it's also a good point to think about, like,
I want a question for us.
I've been disappointed. I need to reinvent myself.
Okay, let's do this.
The other one too. Do it on the other one. Give us a, yeah, there.
Oh, alright. Attempted.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Please.
I feel like it's listening. You said redistribute earlier.
That's what I would say.
So, it's now asking for, who's interested in listening to us.
Oh.
Leo Chelly's.
Sam Altman in the
Rich, you might get in trouble, bro.
I mean, I'm leaving anyways.
So if we were to say, I guess the theme of
Pope Leo in
Yeah.
one,
we
and
could-
Sam Altman in another.
yeah.
Okay, so it wants to customize by user group. Right?
So if we were to say, policymakers, thinking on systems levels, and we'll stray away from like the
Yes.
and now what redistribution of power interests us most? So if we were to just pick all of them, or
Capital.
Democratic public ownership, worker labor representation, open source commons models, international multilateral bodies. Can you read it from that?
Yes.
yeah,
We passed your eye exam.
pick everything, and we'll. And then we'll focus on the U.S. maybe for now.
Of course.
Need to help the most.
Isn't the US the world?
And then on the other side, what dimensions of the concentration concerns you have affect us the most? And I will just say everything.
All of the above.
Do we do to the ones on the left though? If you want
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah. No, we could do that.
You can definitely write a paper even from this exercise.
Yeah.
We can do that in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's
Which is what we do.
convincing all the humans to do it. It's like-
Can you share the whole screen? I think we're not seeing the.
Oh, are we?
No, you guys are seeing the whole
Oh,
screen.
the Zoom link. So
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, how's it
Yes.
now? Good?
And you could use a bigger screen if you want.
Okay, I think we see.
They're probably collecting our information now and sending it to TSA. Random check.
It's interesting now. It's like seeing it is like view one is like the structural interventionist, and we're basically coming in and trying to jump into the structure and. This is really taking the perspective like antitrust view. Yeah, I wonder what the other viewpoint's actually going to look like, because if this is saying democratic systems are probably better, is so market sovereignness.
Because you're aiming at policymakers, right? So
Right.
it makes
Yeah.
sense. Or maybe change the lens.
Right this.
What is it? I don't know what the left is doing.
It's think bigger, yeah.
It's running a markdown file.
It's an outfit, I think.
Yeah.
Can you ask for a summary?
TLDR.
It's Saturday, 4 p.m.
All right, bro. Thank you very much.
The question was like.
So we'll see what this distills in sentences.
Draw a picture.
Thank you for the 3 sentences.
It doesn't
Very
know the
long
count.
sentences.
It does
Three
not.
brief sentences. Not
Have you ever tried to words with AI? It can't like figure numbers. So like it starts with A, it ends with E, it's 5 letters long, and it can't get it right
Yeah.
because it can't count. You literally cannot count.
Because it goes by.
Meanwhile, somewhere else.
Meanwhile.
It put market literally on the left. Said market concentration. To an economic.
I mean, the one in the left has something that it's located now in a classroom and has to deliver a lecture.
Yeah.
It won't end with an E. You're just like, I don't know what you're saying.
Right. So I guess like looking at the right side, we'll start with the first view of structural interventionists. And I think that's probably where I personally resonate a little bit more with in terms of viewpoints. But it's saying that market concentration is a feature of unchecked capital accumulation. It's not a bug to be patched with mild antitrust enforcements, or only state restructuring can reverse it. So basically saying we need to change the entire system. And this roadmap that it proposes aims to place emergency measures to freeze further consolidation, structural separation of the compute model distribution stack, and a transition to public or commons ownership of foundational AI infrastructure. And they bet that the democratic control of critical technology is likely safer than a corporate monopoly, and that the internet precedent, where the government build commons enabled competitive private markets on top, is the right historical analogy. It's really interesting. And the other one is the market sovereignist, and where it says that AI concentration is a temporary, self-correcting product of effects, and heavy government intervention will entrench incumbents rather than dislodge them, while ceding the innovation race to adversaries. The roadmap focuses on removing friction for challengers, interoperability mandates or talent deregulation and regulatory sandboxes, and prosecuting specific anti-competitive behaviors without restructuring ownership. And the core bet here is that the greater long-term danger is a state monopoly over AI, and that light touch enforcement plus private-led standard bodies will produce a more competitive and innovative outcome rather than public ownership ever could. I'm kind of curious to see, like, if you were to classify where we are in terms of our government state and our regulatory landscape, do you see it leaning one way or the other currently?
Is this a trick question?
No, it's
Yeah.
Ask it which one it agrees with more.
Yeah. I wonder if Grok would tell us something different.
Yeah, I think we should just go back to asking Grok and Claude. Like the same problem.
Agree.
Has anyone switched back to ChatGPT?
So
I don't think I've gone. They have the best image. I use ChatGPT when I run out of cloud credits.
So, some of the we can go back.
Yeah, me neither, but I think ChatGPT is better. Right.
Oh, I love that.
Oh,
Using too much memory and it's now you know what we're talking about.
And we would like you to make sure that it's not how you write.
Oh, that's interesting. And does it work? That's wrong.
And it would explain how it's not
So,
less data.
you know, I think it's being very political here.
Does it really?
Because I use that as well.
Because that's what's in there.
Huh?
So it
Yeah.
doesn't talk about
I started. Like I started writing more like ChatGPT since using
Would there be something around, so if you pursue one of those two areas?
No, I mean, that makes
what's the
sense.
result? To be the next.
So it's 50 years or 10 years from now.
Well, so literacy took 50 years
Right.
to develop, so if this is a tool that the rate is faster, but the only constraint is the human
Right.
actually absorbing the changes and adapting to the changes. Because you can go farther with the information, but you can't, you have to have time to like sink it in. Even your fastest human processor with brain is gonna only be a certain speed, right? So you can't, you're not replicating people, right? You have the information, but you may not do it. Like, I can do all these prompts now, but I have to be able to absorb it and then actually do it.
Right.
So the question is, how would you replicate that with people?
Right. It's a good question, and it's challenging. It's like the whole, it's like social, like it's like it's beyond the human computer interface. It's like a social computer society, like taking in this information, acting it, implementing it.
Yeah, because we're like losing actually the parts of being able to absorb because we can ask so many prompts, but now we want it in 3 sentences, like, so then it has to be broken down for every person, right?
Right. That's a great point. I'm kind of curious to see like what it's expecting for both of these futures and what that would look like in the future. I'll say path one.
There's no rent to cars.
You know, like it's writing a lot. Maybe I'll just ask for bullets. So, you know, it seems like the first world, it's saying that these corporations, you know, there's a public AI corporation. You know, so kind of, there's a redesign where we've like, you know, decentralized these foundation models, kind of central area of hosting it, and maybe some. You know, I don't know if DARPA is where we want to put that, but and you know, I think it seems to create a different scenario where the economic gains are distributed through the entire public access and with like labor code determination policies that are giving people that are involved meaningful stake. I wonder if also like this is taking like an optimistic government and saying that if we give it to them, like they're going to really actually go down that path when that technology's in their hands.
May I ask for an experiment? Now or later on?
Yeah.
Let's imagine that you're a native Spanish speaker person who is trying to understand the landscape of AI and is using this technology to try to get some help. If you're not really proficient in English, this comes across as sensical and definitely not suited for your thing. Maybe we could ask it to simplify the tone or the speech to equate it to someone who's learning the language and see how it would explain things compared to a full proficient English person.
This is wordy even for a full proficient English person. I think this is.
Explain it to you like a 6th grade, at a 6th grade.
Yeah.
6th grade.
I wouldn't even, I mean,
3rd grade.
coming from my, I wouldn't even boast it in terms of grade, but I raw or crude, like I don't understand you, I just came to this country and learning English. Can you please?
I don't know how you explain DARPA to a third
like
grader.
how it owns.
Exactly.
But even simplified language is
Yeah.
at a level in which there's a lot of
I
nuance.
think just telling it to be less verbose in general is probably a good.
Like, and keep it in English so we can tell the information someone like me or an immigrant could get from the same questions.
I'm actually curious if you like
So,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
There's a lot of it. I mean,
I also wonder, so kind of taking a look at the two responses, I was wondering what your guys' takes on these were after you've had a second to read through them. Like, interested in hearing your perspectives on these two worlds.
I like the powerful helper robot at home. I'm still waiting for that one.
It's like the Roomba, does that count?
No, Rosie from the Jets. Probably most people don't know that, but the helper robot that does all your stuff.
Or what, like Tesla has the Optimus?
Well, they said like, so literacy, 50 years, it's a generational change, right? So the next kids growing up now, I have an 11-year-old daughter, like, so the world that she enters in as an adult at 18, 20 is going to be really different from today. So that's not very long, that's 7, 8 years.
Right. Right. That is very interesting. And we're seeing kids grow up nowadays in a completely different environment than all of us have grown up in. And I think one of I was having a conversation about this with someone who's essentially talking about how we were bored as kids. I don't see kids bored anymore. There's no boredom that exists. There's always something buzzing, something lighting up, something going on, and it's interesting because now problem solving or identifying things to do or being creative is no longer really a thing. I wonder if it starts as early as that. And Russ, I saw your hand was up.
One that you're asking for our thoughts on these things. It strikes me that it's fallen into sort of like the polarization, the way that people look at the U.S., which is it's either the government runs everything or government is terrible and companies run everything. And it seems like I would love if there were other alternative paths besides those two basic framings.
So would you maybe think like a global framework of some sorts where we're not really relying on like the capitalistic model of the United States, in a sense?
Yeah, or that there's a middle ground that involves cooperation. That there's some way to do that, whether it's public-private partnerships or different models. Like it seems like there's this. I don't know. When you ask it for two options, it's like, well, the left option or the right option. However, it seems like there ought to be other alternatives.
Yeah.
Did we ask it specifically, like to give us the, canonical Republican view and the canonical Democrat view, or it just sort of went that direction? I mean, there are reasons why that happens, right? That are structural and based on the system that we have.
Right.
And so maybe that's where it comes from. But I would wish there was another one. So if you're asking what I would wish there are other options that are not seemingly so left versus right.
We did say yes.
We asked for polarizing views.
Yeah.
Okay, so we did ask it.
Yeah.
I wonder now, if what you're saying is the structure of the United States inherently set up in such a way where we're now dealing with these two poles, if that makes sense, where we have a capitalistic market, we have a government that's supposed to kind of act as a check or balance to it. Now this is the other side of it. Is this structural challenge presenting now because of the setup of the economy and the regulatory bodies that oversee it?
Yeah, I think that it's reasonable that that's what would result in this. I would love to open up the structure to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, to your point, Rahul, I mean, like political parties and their beliefs definitely evolve with time. But I think in the current political spectrum, I do think that that's kind of where a lot of the polls tend to lie at. But I do think I'm curious if you gave it a different timeline for a different political landscape, what it would put the polls at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or if we asked it for a solution that Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders could agree on. Something that takes it off of that left versus right, you know.
Right. Right.
Because there are a lot of shared interests across, you know, libertarians and progressives, but then, you know, anyway, I would be curious to take it in that direction.
Yeah, so I guess like maybe breaking down the prompt or the problem that, or kind of the guides for solving the problem. It seems like geography is like, you know, one big component of it and who's involved. And in addition to like the wording, like stepping back a bit, what are like the components or parts or ingredients of this recipe that we put together? And it seems like the other kind of part is who are the parties that are kind of involved in this. And it seems like parties involved here in our prompt are the companies and the government. Wondering if there's other kind of parts of this ingredient that we can maybe brainstorm together as we kind of envision this.
So one interesting thing that was reminded of recently, and I love this, I think this would be great to, you know, prompting is one of the 101 things that you do, and then you go so deep in that you forget about it, and it's critical. When we're talking about all of this, it's also like, who does the AI think it's talking to? Is it like when it's talking about something, saying, maybe like reviewing something about somebody, is it saying it to that person? Is it saying that to that person's friend, that person's enemy? Name who they think they're talking to, it will give you much more honest truth, or maybe not. And so there's this whole problem of the chatbot wants to make you feel really good about yourself and hype you up and stuff. And so sometimes it's actually useful to trick it into thinking that you're talking about some totally other person. So in this case, I don't know, because the idea I thought of was it's reporting back to its alien council or something. Removing, you're talking to like your alien commander, and you're doing US and figuring out what's happening. And how does that change what it
You might get in trouble if we find the problem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, you know, you bring up a
Assuming
good...
there's other,
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point of like syncophancy. So there's been this project that we've been trying to work on for the past year and a half, 2 years, and it's like every time we take a step forward and try to understand syncophancy, it's like 2 steps backwards. You know, we gave up on trying to even like elicit or in a structured or objective way, and now we step back and said, well, we've been working on this, we've been talking about this for the past year and a half. What are the problems and kind of challenges in thinking about this? And it's so complex that we're basically writing a paper saying, hey, we tried this and we couldn't figure this out. And we had, you know, people, social scientists involved, like philosophers involved, people with backgrounds in indigenous philosophy. There's just all sorts of people that were coming into conversations, jumping in, joining in, just all sorts of folks. And I think, you know, this is kind of going back to the point of like, you know, is there it's definitely very important, we know that, but the means in which it acts are too hard to really clarify, but that's certainly there. And even if we were pretending to be aliens, maybe it would take a view protecting us or against us if we're using Grok, and saying, hey, like, you know, these are structures that if you guys are aliens, you should impose because it'll keep them safe. Or these are structures that you should impose because it'll bring the AI to technology to supremacy. So
yeah, that's a really good point. It's like, what kind of alien are you?
Right.
Yeah, what is your goal here?
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, I think then the other question is, what about the prompt of that ingredients list? What is our goal? What are we trying to do?
You can ask the left.
Yeah. So
You're not really using examples.
So I guess if we were like, what are
it sounded like the goal is balancing power so that more people can participate in developing, funding, and integrating with this tool so that there can be a outcome of lived humanity that is for the masses, not just for a smaller group of people.
and I think, you know, one of the challenges too is like which small group does it think we're referencing and which small group do we?
Yes, we ask it for its own errors, right? Like, what's your assumptions? I don't think we've asked that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that we're thinking about asking that, you know.
Yeah.
So I wonder, you know, maybe if we were to put the chatbots to the side and kind of zone for a little bit, it seems like then, we're asking it to define its own errors. That's another kind of part of the mix where its blind spots are in that ingredient list. Is there anything else that you guys feel like we should include in thinking on governance structures?
Someone added something in from the Zoom.
Yeah, so on the Zoom chat they had said,
So,
yeah.
they are always very focused in something there. But I would bring it back to the challenge he put on us. So what? We spent 2 days here immersed with amazing people, different way of thinking, background, positionalities, what have you. So what do we do at whatever 5 or 6 p.m. when we leave home? A, as individuals, B, as a community, and you put a challenge saying let's organize more of these, making offer to support us who want to do it in our church or synagogues or temples or libraries or what have you. So can you bring us down what is it that you want us to take home and what can we do to recover agency, to understand that those systems are biased, that there is, the growth, all these things, can we bring it back home?
Absolutely. I think that's kind of a important part of this. And I'm going to stop the screen sharing for now and I think bring the conversation, recenter it back a little bit. But, I think echoing what Leo had said, I think the fundamental thing that we should be doing more of is having more of these conversations and engaging groups of people that might not be using AI but still that understand what it means to be human, understand what technology could be doing, is doing, and understand also what the communities that we represent, what the visions for what what we imagine the future looks like, and sharing those outwardly. I think that's one of the biggest things. And there's the other kind of component of this is we can create opportunities for people's voices to be shared, but then also on the receiving end making platforms for them to be heard. And if you're in a position where you're creating a company or you're working with the other side of things where you're investing into companies, then making sure that we're being very intentional about seeking those conversations out and proposing those to people that might not be, that's not at the forefront of their thoughts. So I think the voices being amplified and voices being heard are kind of the first step. And the second step is imagining, right? I think the creativity aspect and being able to think of what the future could look like and actually making it tangible, debating about it, conversing. And sometimes there's some friction with that, but I think more of those challenging conversations need to occur between groups that all have a collective or different interests to identify what the common ground is, because I don't think there is one as of right now that's been shared in literature or shared in a space or represented to the government. And the government, at least in the space of Health AI, is like, we don't know what to do, and they requested a request for information, the Health and Human Services a while ago and a couple months ago, and even the responses don't represent all the groups. And there were about 447 responses to that request for information for Health and Human Services. That certainly doesn't represent the United States. And a majority of those were overwhelmingly from people with interest, insurance companies, tech companies, and medical societies. And so I think the other kind of arm about making more stages to be heard of beyond your platform as well is trying to get involved with advocacy in ways and trying to project our voice, building those governance structures. And I think one of the challenges with that is the governance structures aren't there yet and they're ever evolving. And I don't have a great answer for that right now, but I think we could do a better job of reimagining who could be involved in those governing agencies as they're being set up. At least in the state level, there's offices of AI policy being formed. This is a very tangible thing that we can get engaged with. And they're very small right now and they're very malleable. And so many of the states, not every single one of them yet, are working to build these offices out. And one of the challenges that all of them have expressed to us has been, we don't know, what our blind spots are. And I think that's a great place to collect thoughts, collect ideas, and share them so that we can tangibly influence policy. And the great part about that setting is that when you chat with them, they kind of have a lot more flexibility than a federal kind of governing body. They're not over 50 different states. and DC as well, they're in their own state. And so they're pretty willing to test things out and have actually are interested in creating sandboxes now for AI. That's what's going on in Utah. Texas is interested in doing that. Arizona, California, there's a couple other states that are kind of exploring this where they're willing to say, hey, you have this idea, let's test this out. You have this company, let's test this out. But I think the part that, concerns us is if we don't say, hey, this company's there doing this thing, and they never hear from certain groups or people that are being hurt or they're not being represented in the values. So I think that is the most tangible, feasible way right now in my eyes to get involved. And then the other kind of perspective too is like we continue to engage in like discourse about this and love to open up our meetings and conversations and events that take place around this to everyone. And we'd love for you guys to share your thoughts. If you guys want to and use chatbots and explore your different perspectives, we'd love to compile that together and produce a report and put together a report and say, hey, we had phenomenal group of people in a room together, all with different perspectives, sitting in Silicon Valley at Stanford, trying to piece together what the future could look like. And we had an exercise. We tried to collectively imagine that through a prompt with a chatbot. Just designing the prompt, writing the first prompt was already challenging because of all our different. We realized that maybe there's no one way to do it, but we look at the many different ways each of us does it. And if you guys are interested, we could collect all that together, put that together into a report, and share that with the governing agencies, the people that are out there, and produce impact in that capacity. And would love for other ideas as well. Those are just some of my initial thoughts.
I think the way I see it, and as I participate in more of these, in this hackathon, wherever you want to call it, something I've come to realize is that, I don't know if you've noticed, but in these 2 days we have barely coded anything. But we haven't coded at all. And we haven't built any software system at all. And yet I think all of us here have learned something about software engineering, and how these systems navigate and operate within our systems. So I think part of the take-home, sometimes I've met a lot of people who felt, and I've talked with this about many of you, like regulators and people in policymaking are afraid because they don't know, they feel like they don't understand the guts of the technology. And we need to host more events and more conversations, even if it's one-to-one, whenever you leave this space, with people to make them realize that it's not about the technical aspect always, that's what collaboration is for, that you can systems are for and the dangers of them just by talking, by thinking, like, hey, classic philosophy. So I think that's one of the learnings here for me, and the more events I attend to, the more I learn and the different perspectives I get engaged with.
Yeah. So and love to kind of open the floor up to maybe you guys have, in your perspectives, been able to advocate. Maybe not in the space of AI. Just to think about that a little bit, and we will break for networking and refreshments and just kind of talking afterwards. That sounds good. We've advocated all of it together at some point, in some way, shape, or form.
When we talk about AI, should we include, the backing of why transformers were made, why RNNs were made, or do we just focus on, natural language processing and large language models and leave out the, past history of it?
So, this is a great question, right? Like understanding like who we're talking to when we're talking about policymakers. So, majority of the Office of AI policy, they do have people that are researchers, PhDs, and have technical backgrounds that are involved. However, in shaping the future, it's like what is a healthy amount of looking at the past and describing the past to kind of inform the future. And when we start getting too into the weeds of it, then they see it as like a technical thing that is like doesn't really affect systems, even though that's not necessarily true. So I think balancing that with the component of actionability and relevance to today's world really thinking about how the scaling of a transformer model and the exponential scaling that occurs with that is going to translate into something that's 8 steps distant. And so I think illustrating closer to what's going on now allows for them to be a little bit more action forward. And the other kind of thing too is that the policymakers are like the researchers are not the ones necessarily drafting the policies in those offices either. Like groups of lawyers or a lawyer in the case of Utah that's involved, and it's important to make sure that when we communicate with them, our language is not placed in this way that bars the lawyers or people that might not have that research background out of those conversations. And now that limits perspectives in writing the bill. Awesome.
Yeah, my experience with regulators in particular is that predicates are a key mechanism for sort of motivating action. And so I think working up good predicates, and it may be that we're in a situation where there is no predicate, but figuring out examples of how this has gone in the past and how action taken by officials in a similar circumstance, whether it's about water regulation or whether it's about utilities or maybe the internet or something like that. And I'm not familiar enough with the history of those sorts of things, but I think that might be a good place to start if there was a coherent story about how activity like that was particularly helpful.
Yeah, I think looking to our environment and the world around us is certainly, I think, the best way to kind of make that connection, right? I think we have a very strong as humans in the world around us. I see also a message in the chat about kind of telling the story in the narrative, and one of the suggestions that Katya was mentioning and kind of bringing up forward was that storytelling and for policy, storytelling allows them to shift perspectives, and ultimately storytelling as a result of shifting perspectives can help shift dollars. And so the financial shifting and weighting that occurs and where a government places value or places money, places resources is, I think, like it's really key that we kind of affect that component of it. And she said that we should use stories such as testimonies or things that have happened to communicate, and then translate that into advocacy or translate that into shifting of dollars or budgets. And it's interesting because like even though the Office of AI Policy exists, one of the I keep coming kind of as we're proposing solutions or ideas or not solutions, but ways to try to get ahead of this, and they keep coming back to financial constraints. They can only hire 6 people to govern this. 6 people that are trying to keep track of 30 different applications for companies trying to join these sandboxes. They have hundreds of thousands of users using these platforms. They have to evaluate the results of them. There's maybe 2 of those people know how to do stats, right? Like it's really challenging to stay on top of. But I think going above that and going to say a governor's office and saying, hey, there's a story. There's I was talking to our community here. I feel this has happened to me. Could get shifting of some of that weighting of what gets assigned to these offices from above as well.
Can I add to it? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. No, so no matter whether I'm at the local, like state government or down at Congress, these congressional members, they use stories. Those stories get translated into testimonies to advocate for what they want to push. Once that law is passed, there's no money attached to that law. How it actually becomes, can you hear me or no?
Yeah.
Okay. How that law actually gets attached to money is, again, storytelling, and then they use that advocacy to basically fight for the money in the budgets, right? So whether it's, I think the most impactful thing that we can do, yes, Congress is great. So it's actually, no, it is not. But it is not. But the most impactful is our local government, right? So we vote with our dollars, we vote with our attention, and we vote with our feet. And so just that shift actually is very, very impactful.
So kind of as we come to kind of the close of today's and conversations. I think now we kind of have not an objective like a plan that's like set in stone, but rather some things that we can think about, some actionable stuff with a tangible ways we can get involved, but also recognizing that there's more to build. And I think we're gonna just leave everyone with kind of encouragement to reflect, to think, continue dreaming, continue building, continue expressing your voices and those around you, and creating more for continued involvement so we can continue to build and grow and prevent this from turning into something that hurts us 10 years down the line. So really grateful for everyone for joining the event today as well as yesterday. And it's been a long couple of days with some challenging questions, and I don't think there's any answers that we have yet, but love to continue the narratives. And that being said, we do still have refreshments and coffee, so we'd love to continue chatting outside, and we can maybe break out of this lecture hall and get out of class today.
Is it selfie time, picture time?
I think so. We'll do a picture outside.
Outside?
Yeah.
We should do it in the nice auditorium with a tree in the middle.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes, yeah. Yeah.
That's important.